before Helene even got there, a windless rain had settled over the county for about 3 days.
The Tennessee Supreme Court hereby activates and promulgates a limited disaster plan for all the trial courts in 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th judicial districts due to the severe flooding that occurred on September 26th and 27th, 2024.
I'm okay, but my community is
The
not.
court grants a 45-day extension of mandatory deadlines contained in the Tennessee Rules of Civil Procedure, the Tennessee Rules of Criminal Procedure, the Tennessee Rules of Juvenile Practice and Procedure, the Tennessee Rules of Appellate Procedure, and other applicable court rules.
My courtroom is gone.
There are just piles of their lifetime of memories sitting beside the highway like a pile of trash because it's ruined now.
This 45-day extension applies to any document that would have been due to be filed in the courts of the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th judicial districts.
At the point that they reach Newport, they are considered to be Category 3 waters, which means they need to be dealt with as if they were raw sewage.
Orders of protection and temporary injunctions that would otherwise expire between September 26th and November 12th, 2024 are hereby extended until November 12th, 2024.
Something that I have seen throughout this is the neighbors getting together and helping people like you've never seen before.
The remnants of Hurricane Helene brought a tremendous amount of damage to East Tennessee. Cocke County was under a state of emergency and downtown Newport was evacuated. The aftermath has had an impact on everything: everyday life, business, and of course, day-to-day court operations. Hello, and welcome to Tennessee Court Talk, a podcast produced by the Administrative Office of the Courts. I'm Samantha Fisher, Communications Director, and we are joined by Chancellor Jim Ripley, presiding judge of the 4th Judicial District, and Judge Carter Moore. And the 4th Judicial District in Tennessee includes Sevier County, Jefferson County, Granger County, and of course Cocke County, which was the hardest hit. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Just to start off, can you tell us how are things presently going? We're recording this podcast in mid-October.
First of all, several of those counties that you mentioned, Sevier, Jefferson, Granger was affected. But of those counties, Cocke County was the worst by far. Newport, and Carter, my colleague here, is from Cocke County. Newport is situated very close to both the French Broad River and the Pigeon River. And it was totally inundated with water. And it was a very, very scary situation. But much of that weather went to the east, so western North Carolina obviously was horribly affected by it. But several of our counties are pretty much unscathed, so it's a good thing.
Judge Moore, can you tell us what this was like?
There had been reports, on the weather that warning of potential flood situations coming up. And before Helene even got there, it's just like a windless rain had settled over the county for about 3 days. And everything was already, the ground swells were filling up, at that point. There's nowhere to put it. And then the remnants of the hurricane hit.
Yeah.
And they had been hitting the night before, and I expected a major flood the next morning. And I live, on the property I live in, there's a trout stream called Indian Camp Creek that runs through it. And it was as high as I'd ever seen it. And it runs into Cosby Creek down the road from me. And my mother lives on that creek. She's 73 years old and says as high as she'd ever seen it.
Wow.
And the road to her house was blocked for me. I couldn't get to her at the time. I mean, she was fine. She was on high ground, but a lower part of the road was completely blocked off. And I was just worried to death about what was going to become of the folks closer to the Pigeon River, which Cosby Creek flows into. And let alone I didn't know about the devastation along the French Broad as well at the same time, which the Pigeon runs into, and the Nolichucky also runs into it. And to my understanding, in this part of the country, those were the three main watersheds that were hurt the most. You hear about the devastation in Asheville and Swannanoa and so on and so forth. Those are watersheds that feed the French Broad, which runs through Cocke County. And then, the Pigeon's headwaters are above Waynesville, North Carolina, which feeds into the middle part of Cocke County and runs through downtown Newport.
What kinds of things were you hearing from neighbors or colleagues? You obviously have deep roots in this area.
In real time, I wasn't really able to talk to any colleagues because there were phone satellite failures. I could text somewhat at my house, but couldn't really make a call for days. But several individuals, my judicial brothers and sisters, reached out with offers of help to me and my fellow colleagues in our district, all the way up to Chief Justice Kirby sent me a personal message, and I appreciate that, with an offer of help. Some of them I wasn't able to communicate with. I don't know if it was somebody's phone service or not, and they would call another judge friend and say, and they were able to get through. I remember, I'll name names. Bill Cole had called me and or tried to text me, and I tried to text back, and it wouldn't send. Sometimes that wouldn't happen. Yeah. And then Shane Sexton had been dispatched to make sure I was okay by Bill Cole. I said, well, I can't communicate with him, but you can let him know that I'm okay, but my community is not at this point. Something that I have seen throughout this is the neighbors getting together and helping people like you've never seen before in Cocke County. It's amazing because we have several communities that set low along the Pigeon, the Denton community and the Edwina community. Hartford, where you hear about a lot of whitewater rafting, they were underwater and just had to have catastrophic damages to the businesses and homes along the Pigeon there. And then in downtown Newport, so much of it is setting so low that a lot of it was destroyed or rendered unusable, like Chancellor Ripley's courtroom.
Right. So my courtroom was in what they call the Annex building, which is some distance from the main courthouse across the railroad tracks, but much closer to the water, to the river. And it's a total loss. The building was actually shifted on its foundation, resulting in a big crack through the masonry in the rear of the building.
Oh, Lord.
It housed my courtroom and the offices of my clerk and master, Craig Wild, and unfortunately, it also housed the majority of the prisoners in Cocke County.
This is not a solid number, but I would say 80 to 90%. I should have called the sheriff, but it's most of them. Go ahead, Chancellor.
So, they summoned buses, I guess, school buses, and were able to get the prisoners moved, and they moved them to Sevier County and Jefferson County. But the building is a total loss, and the basement area of that building is the archives, generally for the county, for Cocke County, and for my court. The clerk and master, Craig Wild, great man, and he really arose to the occasion in this case. But he called me, he said, Chancellor, we've got a real problem here because we can move our offices, but these records are just, they're in feet of mud. Oh. And so I said, well, let me come look at it. So I got my boots and mask, and you've got to understand that the waters that came down through these rivers that Carter mentioned, at the point that they reach Newport, they are considered to be Category 3 waters, which means they need to be dealt with as if they were raw sewage.
Okay.
So the basement of this building had been completely filled with water and mud and silt, and it was just a terrible mess. It smelled terrible. It was just awful. And my initial thought was, well, we can't do anything. We can't save these records.
When you talk about records, are you talking about paper records in boxes?
Yes. Big volumes of dockets and records going back into the 70s in some cases, and some of them had been in boxes that were sitting on top of filing cabinets. So when it filled with water, these boxes overturned, and there was mud in there that was 8-10 inches deep. And so, as I said, my initial thought was, this isn't something we can salvage, and but Cocke County has an archivist who is responsible for the records, and he said, we've got to talk to the state archivist about this. So we did, And the state said, look, we're going to have to try to salvage those records. And I knew nothing about that. The archivist indicated that there'd been a big flood in Nashville, which I remember 10 years ago, maybe.
The Cumberland got up.
Yep. And she indicated that they used a company that comes in and freeze dries the records. They put them in tractor trailer trucks that are freezers, and they freeze dry the records. And once that's accomplished, then they can clean them once they've got them dried off. The problem is that's a very, very expensive operation, as you can imagine. And, a county such as Cocke County that's confronted with this disaster to begin with is strapped for money as a result. And now they're looking at having to deal with these records. So that's a tough situation. But we moved the clerk and master's office up to a space in a strip mall, and they've done a remarkable job. They're working off of tables and stuff in there, and they're set up and so that we can take filings. People need to get their complaints filed and their documents filed. So fortunately, the Supreme Court handed down an order that gave us some relief with regard to statutes of limitations and things like that, which Justice Kirby, Chief Justice Kirby, reached out to me as she did to Carter and was just great. She said, what can we do? What can we do to help you guys over there? I was worried about the lawyers because I know the anxiety of professional responsibility to get things filed in a timely fashion. And I was concerned about that. And for days, we didn't have an office. We didn't have a place where you could go to file your complaint. So she has indicated to me that the Supreme Court is 100% on board with helping us. So I think if that time period lapses and we need more time, we'll get it. And that's the way it should be. People shouldn't be, through no fault of their own, deprived of their ability to access the courts because of a natural disaster. I mean, it just shouldn't happen. And she recognized that, the court recognizes that, so I think we're in good shape in that regard. And it was very heartening to hear from her. My courtroom is gone, so we're going to hold court in the Newport Utilities building, and I have no idea what this will look like. I don't know, do they have rooms big enough to seat all of the litigants and witnesses and so forth, but we'll make it work. As I said, my clerk and master over there is a very resilient guy and very determined guy, and we'll get it done. We have to.
Judge Moore, do you have any thoughts about, just sharing your experience with other judges, anything that, just about looking ahead or how to be prepared for something like this?
This is the record high for the Pigeon and the French Broad, and which I'm sure there are other buildings that are situated near water in the county seats of towns, just because that used to be one of the main travel ways, in the old days, and that people took goods and persons from point A to point B. And we were like that, and I mean, there had been minimal flooding in the past. I want to say that I'd always heard that we had a few archival floods in the old days, well before mine and Chancellor Ripley's time. But now we had the world record flood, or the river's record flood, if you will, as high as it has been. And I wish that we had an appropriate facility to hold our inmates. I do appreciate our sister counties, Sevier County and Jefferson County, for what they're doing for me, because I generally cover the criminal docket in Cocke County. So these are people who are going to have to be transported multiple times each month to come and have court in Cocke County, and for how long, I don't know. So that's been one of the parts that I've been worried about. And Sevier County's in the process right now building the Justice Center. It's not ready yet, but like I said, I appreciate Sheriff Hodges and Sheriff Coffey in Sevier and Jefferson County, but because I know they have to be burgeoning with their own citizens there to take on, like I said, the vast majority of my prisoners. I actually haven't held criminal court in that county since this. I've held recovery court in Cocke County, and our newest judge, Adrian Waters-Ogle, has had a civil court date after we got the water situation straightened up in Newport. Haven't gone back to school yet. It actually worked out well. My brother is the superintendent of schools in Cocke County, so he's been on the ground dealing with a lot of this as well. And he said that fall break turned out this year to be at a fortunate time. They canceled school the week after the flood, and then they had fall break to try to get water back on to and make sure that they can get children to school in rural districts like up in Del Rio and the old 15th that's got a body of water next to it coming into Del Rio, and various other places where there's a lot of water running through Cocke County, and there was before this, and
lots of water, but no water to drink.
Yeah.
You know, and that's a terrible situation. And there were a number of places around that were receiving water, and it was coming from everywhere. People were, really, really giving of their resources in that regard. But it's just, you can't take a shower, you can't flush a toilet, you can't, we take things for granted. And this brought home the fact that we shouldn't do that.
That's right. My wife has been, she's had a cause throughout this. She's really been a trooper, getting out and helping people, and I've tried to help her some and help some other folks along the way that I could in any way. And just the day after the waters receded, she spent the last 2 weeks either handing out water and working at churches or, cleaning out mud and people's lost, the things they've lost in their homes that are just, beyond repair. For example, if you drive through those communities, I'm talking about Edwina and Denton and around in there, they run close to the Pigeon, and it's ran through their homes. Hasn't moved most of them, but some of them are either destroyed or off their foundations. But regardless, there are just piles of their belongings and their lifetime of memories sitting beside the highway like a pile of trash because it's ruined now. Oh. And I think our county mayor there's somebody in the county's lined something up that people, there's going to hire somebody to come through and gather all that up, as opposed to flooding our local convenience centers and the landfill, and I don't even know what you do with all of it. There's just so much of it. So,
indeed, a long road to recovery. But what I'm hearing is just incredible resilience from you, Judge Moore, and you, Chancellor Ripley, and certainly the communities that you're living in. It's hard to hear, but it's also inspiring. Well, we really appreciate you sharing this experience with us, coming on Tennessee Court Talk and updating us on the situation there, and just thank you so much. We appreciate what you've been able to share and what you've been able to do and remain in public service and keeping the courts going.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Samantha.